So the picture is small. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be the moderator for tonight, and there's a reason for that. The motto of the Renovables campaign 2025 was full of dignity, and for this reason, there was a press trip to Georgia. Pastor Thomas Schwarz, the general director, I asked him, why Georgia? And he then said, well, in a polarizing world, Georgia is an example for how countries are at least threatened by drifting away towards authoritarian regime. And that's one reason. And 30 to 40% of people live on or even below the poverty line. And this is also about dignity. And Renovables has a couple of projects that it mainly supports via Caritas Georgia. And so much more than the interpreter and somebody who accompanied us was one of the main actors there, Tama Ilurice. So, and not only because we travel together, I call you Tamula. And so she's a journalist. She now lives in Berlin. And it's good to have you here tonight. So we're looking forward to that. And the second important person is Professor Maya Vadice. He's the chairman of the advisory board of the Sultan Saba Obilyani University in Tbilisi in Georgia. So also cordial welcome to you. So at the beginning, so for you to get a small impression of what Renovables is actually doing there in Georgia, I have prepared a short PowerPoint presentation about our trip. So what you can see here as a picture, I have to admit this, the mountains. So that's not Georgia. That's kind of a, well, AI picture somewhere. So that was the welcome in Estia. That's a village, 1,800 meters is the altitude on the border to Armenia. And so they have a very beautiful church there. And so we got a very friendly, very festive welcome. So we see the priest here, and in the background, what it is about. So we have this, well, it doesn't look much, this house, but it's really a revolution. It's revolutionary for such a village. So the priest lives there in the 13th generation, and so they have afternoon, childcare there. And so they learn about robotics, for example, and many other things there. And also due to this child care for the first time, it's possible that the children do not turn into potato farmers like their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. No, they're very proud that they have actually won 2 awards in robotics interpretations. And we have now 5 students that visit medical school there. So we also have the food blogger Alex there who lives there. So he's handicapped, but as a food blogger, he works on a freelance basis with the help of Renovables. So then we move on, where we had to visit a rehabilitation center of the chameleons, Alcacique. So for people with handicaps, we have this for a long time in Germany, for example, but you see that also there they have a very modern equipment now, really state-of-the-art equipment, and also, so we believe this, that it's a very helpful, very caring way of dealing with these people. So we had groups in several villages there, and so we visited this family, for example, where there are also people with handicaps live there. So it's not only about the skills and also the respect that is shown to their children in the center, but throughout the whole village. While in former times, children with handicaps were rather hidden away. And now they can show them in a proud way. And this has a lot to do with human dignity then. So there's a huge character center in the capital with living groups for young women, for example, which which are pregnant without being married out of wedlock. And so there's also social company. And so this also, we also help them with an impact on what Germany has to do. That when they have to return from Germany, for example, to Georgia, or if people had migrated to Greece, for example, to find work there. But there are also a couple of people that applied for asylum in Germany. So, so, so every day they have a call center there, and so they get phone calls, about 200 phone calls every day. So there's a huge demand. So we had a lot of talks. So we said, see managing director Pastor Schwarz and Mr. Schumann, and then the nuncius. And so here, that was a rather controversial discussion with the vice foreign minister of Georgia. So in Georgia, everything is okay when you listen to them. So even after violent protests or beating down these protests, so the protests were peaceful, but so the vice foreign minister then came into his office there, and then she says she's still the real president for Georgia, and there are different opinions who actually has won the election. So on this day, the opposition has formed an alliance. So you can briefly see our group journalists that came with us. So NDR, this German radio station, Domradio, Public Forum, Bavarian radio station. We had reports in the newspapers, on radio, and so on. So there were two journalists that talked about freedom of press, for example, and here two lawyers. And professor, we were also at your university there. So we also had talks there. And one evening, with a part of the group, we took part in the daily demonstrations. And you see that the European flag, also as a graffiti, is very dominant there, especially in the capital, apart from the Georgian flag. So you see children, family members that hold up posters of people that are in prison. So somebody who shows his wounds that he inflicted when he was arrested. And on the left-hand side, she demonstrates for her brother, and the lady on the right-hand side for her son that has been arrested. And what you also see, and some are very fancy, others not, so they wear face covers. And probably you recognize her, that's Tamuna. And that would be my first question to you, Tamuna. Why do you wear face masks or similar things? Well, good evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity to pray for Georgia and report on them. Thank you very much, Frau Babus, for the support for the people in Georgia. That is very important for the country, for the people there. And coming back to your question, I come back to that in a moment. But at the beginning, I would like to talk about solidarity with my colleague for all political prisoners, especially my colleague Amar Globeli. And so they have been arrested for a couple of weeks already. Currently it's 70 people, but an hour ago, two opposition party leaders had also been arrested. And why did I cover my face the whole time? Almost 3 weeks, every evening, but also during the day. Almost everybody is doing it. And the answer is simple. I didn't want to get arrested. So I didn't want to end up in prison. And so that was a huge risk, actually. because the Chinese cameras that are installed everywhere, especially in the streets where people assemble. So, like everywhere, you have these cameras, and they recognize the faces, and either you get a fee of 5,000 lari, so it's about 2,000 euros. So that's a huge amount of money, and so either you get dismissed from your work. So for me, it's not the case because I no longer work in Georgia, but there was this huge risk that I would get arrested. And for this reason, I decided to cover my face, just like many of my friends and colleagues in Georgia. Do you know exactly what you're allowed to do or not have to do so not to get arrested, or or is this quite arbitrarily how people get arrested? Well, you can't know this any longer. There's no legal justification for arresting people. So if you think, yeah, well, I work with foreigners, so I accompanied the foreign guests, European journalists. So they could say you are an agent of Germany or Western countries. So they have this law against me and other people. But it doesn't have to be that necessarily. It could be that they find any other reason against me. For example, posts on Facebook criticism about the government. So this is enough, or has been enough the last 2 years. So, well, impeding car traffic, or, well, 2,000 euros, that's a lot of money as a fine. So that's a severe fine. But in Georgia, this is probably the annual salary. Yeah, people cannot pay that. That's enormous amount. If you think the regular income, it is about 300 euros per month, or even less than that. So it's not possible. And for this reason, the foundations try to cover these fines then. And so many people wire this money to Georgia from abroad. But by law, this is now forbidden to wire the money. But just for the other people to understand that we say, yeah, we allow people to demonstrate, but if the punishment, the fine, is then an annual salary, then you give really second thought to it, how you're going to deal with it. But it's not as severe as if you compare it with other measures that we had. So actually, there's no real reason to arrest you. So street festivals, people are getting arrested and put in prison. So for small things, you can get arrested. Professor Vadice. So officially, people still say you are free, but then everything is limited via these fines and regulations and so on. So is this what is typical for Georgia since the elections? Unfortunately, you're still muted.
Nee, noch nicht.
Sorry, we can't not hear you yet.
Jetzt,
Now.
ja, genau.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Erstmal ganz herzlichen Dank.
So, first of all, thank you very much for your interest in Georgia and for offering me this possibility to share my opinion and my experiences with you, and also having this opportunity. Well, I would like to seize the opportunity to thank Ranavabus for all the work they're doing for us. So, how is the situation in Georgia? So, it's getting worse and worse every day. A couple of hours ago, today, two leading politicians of opposition parties were arrested. Yesterday, a former student, an activist, was arrested without any serious reasons for that. And so it's getting worse and worse. And So we are witnessing at the moment how daily life in Georgia is filled with arbitrary acts so that the government tries to limit the freedom more and more. So an hour ago, I just read that this week we will have a new law or a change of law. The freedom of speech shall be affected. It will be limited even more. So this it's so fast and so brutal how the situation changes. So it's difficult to keep up with the changes. And we have also said that so Russia over the past 12 to 14 years went through this authoritarian process. So in Georgia, it's 1.5 years, especially over these past months. It's really frightening what is going on. It's shocking. We are really all afraid that everybody can be arrested without any reason. Be it a post on Facebook or being critical about the government or well, or for political revenge for any high-standing bureaucrats. So it's really not very predictable, our life any longer. So Tamula, during our trip, I noticed that yesterday we had this regulation and last week we had this regulation. And now you tell us, now there's a new regulation again. So the government has not even been in power for such a long time yet. So what is behind that? That obviously that there are permanently new regulations and laws. So all free voices, all criticism should be restricted. And what they want to achieve is that they have a situation that would be similar to that in Russia. So no matter what whenever you say something against the government, this would have immediate impact. And so we're really moving very quickly towards a totalitarian state. And so I wonder then also, why does the government set up such strict regulations? By controlling the situation completely now. So they're more and more provoking the society, and so the population, the society, where would they like to put them? In which corner? So I don't understand that yet. What do they want to achieve with that? Why did the government start a war against the own people? I don't understand that. Are they so much afraid, or why do they do this? Actually, we can just explain it that they are very much afraid. They see that they are not acknowledged, they are not recognized, not in the country, so and also not abroad. They're also not acknowledged in this government. So the more afraid they are, the larger their restrictions and their arbitrary behavior. So recently I talked to someone who is an active politician, and she said, do they really want to completely copy the situation 100% like in Russia or Belarus, where there's no opposing voice any longer that would be able to criticize that? So we have to really mention here that so the resistance, the government notices the resistance from the population. So this is why they're a bit nervous. So they try to hide all kind of resistance to do away with it. And the faster, the better for them. So then they wouldn't have these tensions in the country any longer. And When we talk about the government, it's kind of a mafia government. So we have to keep that in mind. They are corrupt. Since they have come to power, they steal the people's money. And so they even managed that it's no longer transparent. And for this reason, so critical media were made to disappear so that they can continue that. And so the history is repeating itself, what we have experienced in Belarus or Russia, of course. And when we compare it with Hungary, with the Orban government, it's the same thing, corruption, mafia structures, and of course, in the interest of Russia. And the Georgian government really does that with a great effort. So until October, we were really striving for an accession to the European Union. And since October, we try to get away from Russia. That's what people are fighting for now in the streets. May I add something else? Why the government is really speeding up this whole process. Nowadays, we are completely isolated from the whole world.
Wenn diese Prozesse, wie jetzt, was jetzt außerhalb Georgiens abläuft, diese Spannung mit Israel, Iran, Ukraine.
So when we think about the tensions, Israel, Iran, Ukraine, so the world doesn't have an attention or no focus on Georgia. So I think that they want to make use of this particular moment, that everybody is distracted at the moment, nobody is watching what is going on in Georgia at the moment, and they would like to use this time. And should this topic come back on the agenda, on the international agenda again, then they have all kind of manifested the position already. So this is a method that you have seen in Russia, for example, or also with Lukashenko. So first they create facts, and then based on these facts, they want to negotiate and really fight for their own interest. So they want to boil things up within the country, so that they can keep more should they come into position to having to negotiate. This is why they're acting so fast at the moment, over the past weeks and months. So they want to make use of this time now that the whole world's attention is on Iran and Ukraine, for example.
Ja.
Sonst verstehe ich nicht Ihr Verhalten nicht.
That's the only way I could explain their behavior. So technical point of view, I see a sign of hands, but Ms. Fendrit has pointed out that questions should be written in the chat, please. Otherwise, we would have too many people. So, and then it would be difficult to keep track of that. So who is benefiting from that? Well, the government is benefiting from that for sure. And other people. So they're strengthening themselves now. They have reforms in police at the moment. They have new bosses there. So also movements within the government. And so they reduce transparency. It's not really clear what they are doing there. So they consolidate their position. So what I'm afraid of is that now we have a war between the government and the own people, and the resistance that we can observe in Georgia. What I can say is that this resistance is of the civil society is really heroic and strong, but this enthusiasm, the solidarity, well, I don't know how we can keep that up in the long term, because this, so be it physical persecution, financial constraints, and so on. So the persecution is from all sides. So they try to break the resistance.
Wer ist denn der Widerstand in
Who
Georgien?
is
Ist
the
das
resistance in
ist das
Georgia?
das breite Volk?
So
Ist
is
das,
this the whole civic
ist das kann man das
society,
altersmäßig einteilen?
or
Ist das
is
eigentlich
it certain
etwas, was
age
nur in
groups or
2, 3
something,
großen
or is this just something that
Städten,
happens in
auftritt? Ich
two,
will
three
meine
larger
5
cities?
Tage Erfahrung nicht
So big.
überstrapazieren, aber zum
I mean, I have
Beispiel
some
Estia
experience
hatte ich den
because,
Eindruck,
but in
ja, das
Estia,
war
for
ein
example,
gutes
I had the
Volk. Die
impression
waren
that
froh,
they
dass sie
didn't
aus
care about
ihrem
this. That
alltäglichen
they
Leben eine bessere
were
Chance
quite
haben. Und der
relieved that they get a better chance for their daily
gesagt,
life. And the
wir
priest
haben
said,
Stalin überlebt
we have
und
survived
sind quasi aus
Stalin and
diesem Regime
whatsoever,
und
so
das
we
ist
will also
schön,
survive
das
this regime. I'm
angesehen.
not really
Ja,
interested in that.
ist es wirklich
So
das
is it
Volk
really
der
the
Opposition
people
oder
that is in
wer ist der
opposition,
Widerstand?
but who is opposing it? Well, first of all, it's the whole civic society that over the past 20 years has been established very well. NGOs, political parties, and also independent economic companies that benefited really from this freedom over the past 20 years. So that's a quite broad part of the society. So what they have experienced in this village, well, you went to Armenian villages where unfortunately this population is not really involved in the Georgian history. They live separate from the government, completely forgotten. And so they're not part of the political process. So that's a heritage from the Soviet Union. So these different minorities, they are not really integrated in the social life. So but that's another topic. But just to get an idea, who are these people? So the people that offer resistance, they're not just in Tbilisi, but we have the protest in almost all large cities, Akhalsi, Chititi, and so on. Everywhere we have seen these protests, and the size of these protests, for example, a year or 1.5 years ago, that was second to none in Georgian history. So we had more than 200,000 people in the streets. But slowly, these protests are petering out, not as strong as the first wave. And what I'm particularly afraid of is that we have kind of a nihilism that is spreading, very nihilist feelings in the whole country. And when we observe the situation in the regions, there's fear that is prevailing. People are afraid that they would lose their work, for example, if they work for official bodies and so on. So they don't want to lose this source of income. Tamina, is this all something arisen of the generations? So is this very strongly carried by the younger generation? What is your well the younger generations are very active. So it would be very difficult to draw a line between the different generations.
Weil diese Konflikte Generationen, wir haben schon vor 20 Jahren erlebt.
Because we have already seen this conflict of generations also 20 years ago. So this 30 years of independence of Georgia, we have seen many different changes there. And it's also interesting there because so this from a Soviet society we have turned into a free society, also with democratic traditions that have been carried forward. And this also shows that the Georgian political elite would be actually ready. Well, they don't want to have one leader again or something. And foreign friends ask me, if not really who else? And the answer is there's not one particular person that they want to have. So they said over the past 30 years we have learned if you just have one party in power, they will always make mistakes. So what we need is a multi-party system. And so this mute and this understanding among the opposition parties has really grown. And therefore, it's very difficult. So I would like to ask Tamula, please.
Widerstand. Also
Resistance, yes.
Meiner Meinung nach und meiner Beobachtung nach,
So as far as I can say, of course, it's the younger generation, but also the generation of my parents, for example. So I have seen them in the streets, and I see them also in the news that they also participate. So that they want to bring Western values into the country. So the resistance in the larger cities is present, also in smaller cities and all village. It depends on how much information they get and what kind of information they get. I will get to this in a moment. But there's also resistance abroad. People that live abroad, we also demonstrate abroad very often. And we are quite loud. And I'm holding here a demo accessory. On the one side, you have the Georgian flag, and the other side, you have the European flag. So everybody in Georgia has that. All activists have that, and also have that here as a symbol. So when I go to demonstrations here, I know I do this for my friends at home. And so, for example, in Berlin, there's a huge student organization that organizes these demonstrations. But coming back to Asia, let me say something regarding that. I was also there. I noticed this, that they're not so informed, not as informed as other regions, for example. And this has to do with the poverty. They depend so much on state subsidies and money that they will not speak out so loudly what they really think. And the main problem is that they lack a source of information, information channels. So different research has been done in Georgia, and this says that especially the people in regions where you have ethnic minorities, they get only very little critical information. For this reason, it's really understandable that they will, with the distance from the capital, they distance themselves from the demonstrations. So Professor Vadic said that he's afraid of kind of having a nihilist attitude. Do you experience that in Berlin? So there are about 40,000 people from Georgia in Germany, and the largest community lives in Berlin. So both among your friends and also acquaintances in Berlin, but also when you go to demonstrate in Georgia, do you notice a change in the mood that there's a certain fatigue or something, because the protests have been going on for roughly 6 months now? Yeah, today it's the 241st day So in April, 2 months ago, I noticed that the people are tired. So my sister goes every day in the street, just like my friends. And she told me, I'm so tired, my legs really hurt. And I said, well, you can stay at home. I'm going to do that for you. And so I feel that from the people. But nevertheless, they don't want to give up now. Because if you lose your home, what else will you lose? So that's the most important thing for these people, right? Home, your home country. So it's not just an abstract word, it's about democracy. So things that we have been fighting for the last 30 years or even longer, even centuries. Western values that we really held in high esteem. So after 1990, Georgia has lost almost a third of the population. It used to be about 5 million inhabitants, and now it's 3.6 million inhabitants. So the hope for a real opening of the country and that it's going to move ahead and that it orients itself to the European Union and the accession talks. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but this created kind of a start-up mentality and situation. But do you really fear now that it might move in the other direction? Yes. Yes, it's true. Many people leave the country, and I notice this among my friends, and this is really a pity then. But you can really understand that if you live in fear and in poverty, they want to have their basic needs fulfilled again. But how we would like to proceed, nobody can tell, and it's such a pity. We can really not really make a forecast. The professor already said that everything is changing every hour. I always have my mobile phone on because I'm always afraid that I missed something out. Every hour you have news, and usually it's bad news. And the second thing is the foreign support. So this is very important. So the support from abroad, and that the organizations will not leave the country so quickly, and the companies that work there do it very actively, that they continue to do that and not give up Georgia. That plays a big role for us, and we really place a lot of hope into this. So this provides us with the hope that we can further develop in the right direction, in the Western direction, but the fear is always present. So I would like to just point out that there's a possibility to write questions in the chat. And so is there an active role that the church can play? It's a small minority, but could, well, as a qualified, as an active minority, can they have an impact?
Sie haben ganz Dramatisches ganz kurz hinzufügen.
May I add something? Over the past 30 years, Georgia has experienced 3 wars.
Dieses Krieg alles letztendlich dreht die Unabhängigkeit des Landes.
And it was always about the independence of the country. And the ethnic conflicts in South Ossetia and Abkhazia and so on.
Aber letztendlich geht diese Unabhängigkeit.
But, well, actually, at the end of the day, it was always about independence and European orientation, because this is a matter of mere existence. So European contacts are key for the country, very important, and it's very clear for our opponents, and the opponent is Russia. So it's not just about independence in such a way that we can have self-determination, but that we create the preconditions for democracy, for self-determination. So all of this belongs together, right? So coming back to your question, the role of the church. So if you ask about the Catholic Church in Georgia, well, unfortunately, this is very small. It's just 1% of the society, the Catholics, but we can actually have a special role here. And it's not just about creating a general climate in the country. That would be very difficult with this small number of believers, but that we could have some qualified contacts and that we could have a strong connection to Western institutions. So the Catholic Church in Georgia has a special mission here, well, starting from its own characteristics and the message of Christ to make that really heard. So spreading the gospel and so on. But if it's about economical and social aspects here, then this will also play an important role. We Catholics in Georgia, we are aware of this special role. Unfortunately, we do not always have the resources, financial resources, but also human resources. But what we have, we always try to used to offer qualitatively high services. So we, as the university, we define our role in the academic world in such a way that we foster ecumenical dialogue, for example. So there's also responsibility for the Orthodox Church, because they should also find themselves in such a way that they should emancipate themselves from their Soviet past and should be free of any worldly aspects. So the Orthodox Church, what is their attitude towards the development? It's roughly 85% of the Georgians belong to the Orthodox Church. So what is their attitude toward the development? When we talk about the Orthodox Church, I would like to make a differentiation. The one is the official church, patriarchate, and then believers that unfortunately have nothing to do with church policy. So as regards the patriarch, we notice a negative influence. They are not interested in democracy at all. So, well, it doesn't play into their hands. So they have a similar character, just like other non-emancipated churches in Eastern Europe. I talk about the emancipation from the Soviet past, for example. So Orthodox churches, what they have is that it's an institution that Stalin has completely refounded after the end of World War II, because in the 1920s and 30s, the Bolsheviks really made the church extinct, right? So they murdered people, so there was no church whatsoever. So Stalin actually, after World War II, refounded the church again and called it a church, an Orthodox church. So, and how these structures worked and so on, election of new priests, new bishops, and so on. So this new church has to say goodbye of this tradition of this past 70 years, has to be liberated from that. And therefore, unfortunately, the official Orthodox Church, the Patriarch, plays a negative role here as regards democracy and self-determination. So I can remember when we were in Georgia, Klaus, so our colleague from Dom Radio wanted to talk to a Georgian Orthodox priest, but they didn't want that. So they hesitated, the priest. There was just one priest who was a bit critical about that and offered an interview. And I think he was very courageous. I always see that the priests are just remain silent. You don't know what their personal opinion is, but they don't share their opinion, or very rarely. And I find this really a pity, because we know, as you already mentioned, the majority of the population belong to the Orthodox Church. So they go to the Orthodox mass as well. And as a journalist, I notice this very often, that most priests preach along Russian narratives against human rights, against rights of women, against LGBTQ and so on. So there are very few that have a sermon in another way or preach in another way, and very few priests that speak openly. So there are two questions in the chat which I would like to take up now. One question to me, but actually this goes to Renovabis, to the specialists from Renovabis. So what is Renovabis planning for Georgia, and what kind of projects will there be on the spot? Will you have to ask the government for permission for new projects? as the law and grants requires. So as of the trip, so maybe the specialists from Renovables can correct me if it's wrong, or so far Renovables was able to implement all the projects, correct?
Ja, genau.
Yes.
So, das war also bislang ging das
So
ohne
up
die
to
EU
now,
und genehmigung.
it
Jetzt
was
sollte ich
possible
sagen,
without
das
asking the
macht
government for
Renovables
permission.
auch
And I
nicht,
think
dass sie zur
Renovables
Regierung
doesn't plan that
geht und
to
da
go
halt
to the
ein
government and
Caritas-Projekt
ask
umsetzen zu
to be able
dürfen
to support a
oder.
Caritas project,
Die
for
andere
example.
Frage, was sagen ja, Sie beide dazu?
And the other thing is,
Georgien
what
war
do
schon
the two of
lange
you
in
say?
Abstand zu
So
Syrien und
Georgia
Albanien,
has
das
a
war
large distance to
Unabhängigkeit
Syria and Albania,
in der
but
Liste der
also
Länder,
at
die
very
die
much at the top
meisten
of the list where we had most
Asylbewerberinnen
asylum
und Bewerber
seekers.
kamen. Es waren so rund
So
8.000
it was
im
about
Jahr, glaube ich.
8,000 a year
Dann
that
wurde
came. Then in
2023, glaube ich, also
2023,
weit deutlich vor
well,
dieser
really
aktuellen
before the
Situation
current
Georgia unter
situation
einen
in
sicheren
Georgia, Georgia was
Herkunftsstaat
declared a
bestimmt.
safe
Es gibt
country of
erleichterte
origin.
Abstimmung, weil etwas verkürzt gesagt es ohnehin
So
keine Chance auf Asyl
because
gibt.
there is
Wie
no
meinen Sie, dass diese
possibilities you get
Entscheidung
asylum
revidiert
anyway.
werden sollte?
So do you think this decision should be revised now again, that Georgia is a safe country of origin? Well, that's a difficult question.
Die Leute suchen nach.
So, well, the people. Well, let me rephrase that. So that's my personal experience. So people do not leave their country for finding a better life, becoming richer. If they leave the country, then they are forced, really. Their mere existence is threatened. So that's my experience.
Aber wieder zurück. Wir sprechen über Georgien.
So we talk about
Einmal noch Tamula,
maybe Tamula to directly this question.
Der Meinung auch, die Menschen, die ich schon erwähnt habe,
So the people that I mentioned, they look for their basic requirements, a basic security away from poverty. Probably this politics will change again. I'm not a politician, so I can just assume that this will happen. Because if you see this development now, then you see that Georgia is no longer a safe country. And even the German ambassador in Georgia notices this, and the crime is increasing, and so on and so forth. So I assume that this is going to change again. And this, with the visa politics and so on, this is connected with this. So we have to wait and see what Europe will decide regarding this. And this will have an influence on further immigration movements or politics.
Professor Vadice.
Professor Vadice, your turn, please. So when we talk about Georgia, then we mustn't see it as an independent case or something. So the process that happened in Georgia, so that's part of the whole geopolitical tensions there. Unfortunately, this process, what the Georgian society, many politicians, and they feel isolated from the whole world. And the government has really hugely contributed to that, and they deliberately did that to have a maximum isolation of the country, to have an unrestricted exerting of their power. But when we talk about this case of Georgia, then we have this problem between totalitarianism and democracy. So unfortunately, in 2008, when the Russians came into Georgia at that time, also in Germany, people said, this is an individual case and so on. And my friend said, why did you provoke, you Georgians, why did you provoke the Russians so much? So that was the criticism I heard. At that time, they didn't understand what this actually was about. So that was my superficial impression. But
Problem ist nicht ein georgisches Problem.
So this problem today is not a mere Georgian problem within the Georgian society. So the inequality, the financial inequality is large within Georgia. So so unfortunately, this is to the detriment of self-determination and so on. So unfortunately, we are very much under the control of Russia. So many friends told me that there are Russian inspectors in the country, so they just follow up the politics that are going on in Georgia. So again, Georgia is not one particular problem, but it's a general problem that we are confronted with, which also will have an impact on Germany in different ways. And so what we need from the West, it's not just to say, oh, we're so sorry for you and just make some statements, but what we need is clear actions, clear concepts, reactions to this whole process. Please keep that in mind, because it's not just a problem of the Georgian society, but the problem for Russia or Georgia Georgia has always been a test case for them. Are the two of you satisfied with the attention that Georgia gets in Germany at the moment? Well, that's a bit ambiguous. If you have a look at the whole world, it's difficult to ask for even more, but that that 15 journalists have been there. So this is already a big focus of attention. And this was also had a positive impact. People ask me a lot about Georgia now. So it's very important, these waves of information and so on. And what we also hope for is that we have sanctions also from Germany against people in certain politicians. So I'm invited to many different events, and so then I'm time and again asked, and politicians say, well, it's so bureaucratic, it will take some time, it's complicated. But a couple of people, police officers, there have been sanctions against them, also from other countries, also from the US and so on. So if the pressure continues, then we hope that it will have an impact. And I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, the interior minister had to step down. Well, I cannot be 100% sure what the reason is, but it's probably that his family was sanctioned, and they all want to travel to Europe. So they have collected enough money, and now they want to come to the West and have a life in luxury. And I love that. So 1 year ago, the whole government was here in Berlin in the Adlon Hotel. So like Russian oligarchs, right? And so of course they don't want to lose these privileges. And therefore I find it important, and not the only one that sees it this way, that the national sanctions against representatives of the government or decision makers, that they should be enforced even more. So coming back to the chat, I cannot answer this question, how Renovabis will position itself in the future. I'm not a specialist for that, so Thomas would have to get involved. Well, I'm there. I cannot answer that. Klaus, dear Mr. Binek.
Verantwortlich entscheidet, ob sich darauf einlässt, mit der Regierung.
So the question is whether we will go along with the government and sign papers that are presented to them. So far, this has not happened, the situation that we were forced to do this. And the director of Caritas Georgia, also tries to keep it this way as long as possible. So she confirmed that 3 weeks ago in Berlin. So she hasn't done it so far. So she calls it a Russian agent law. She would like to withstand that. So Renovabis has to be careful that it doesn't put their partners in risk.
Verurteilen gibt, ansprechen.
So, of course, we will talk about things that should be well condemned, but they will not try, or they mustn't endanger the people that are involved there. So, and we notice that today it's not impossible that on 7th October of this year, I will behave like this and that, because the situation will have changed again. Yeah, yes, that's the thing, really. It's not calculable. You cannot really predict anything at the moment. So Tamuna already started with this. What could help, actually? So the accession process of the EU got suspended, so there are no longer talks at the highest level. And so there are penalties against individuals, against some people. But would that be the right way? Is that the right way? Because so far there's not huge success with that, of this pressure. So is the pressure not high enough, or is it the wrong way? Well, it's not the wrong way. In no way. It's not the wrong way. But it has to be more pressure. So the pressure is not a bit low at the moment, and it takes such a long time, but it's really helpful. And
Sie wollen also vielleicht nicht Oligarch muss und will nicht unbedingt nach Europa fahren oder hier.
So not everybody wants to come to Europe then, but the people that work on a lower level, for them it's important to keep that up. So we really have to exert more and more pressure in a targeted way. And another thing is that we need more reporting, so that the German media continue to observe the situation, report about this, and listen to the voices of the people and broadcast this. So the independent media, the critical media, are at risk. They have decreased. So my colleagues, my friends, work pro bono. They don't get a salary anymore. So they continue to work. They do not leave the country, and they continue to struggle. But that's not enough. So the information is not spread to enough people, and this should be spread worldwide, actually. And therefore, we make use of all channels that are possible to pass that on, just like today, for example. And it would be nice and right that the German media, and not just the German media, continue to observe this, because this government, we are a neighboring country to Russia, and you notice what is happening in the region, not just in Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine anyway, Serbia and so on. So it's important to see things in the context. So, Professor Vadice, do you share this opinion, or would you say that we would have to intensify contacts? I read that there have been talks of the government, the Georgian government, with United Arab Emirates, with China. So they intensify their contacts with those countries. And so there are also beautiful hotels in China and luxury. And the elite would maybe find enough luxury there. Would pressure maybe also mean that this Georgian government then says, okay, then we move over to those people that are talking to us? You know, well, soft sanctions sometimes have a worse effect than no sanctions. And the problem is that in Georgia, we do not see that the European Union speaks with one voice, right? And so this was one reason why I talked about nihilism in Georgia. So when more than 2,000 people went in the streets, then people called upon that we could force the government in a peaceful way to step down. And so there was a lot of also attention from abroad. But the problem now is that the government has too much money, and
Medien kam, wie zum Beispiel Stadt Galadze, diese Meria,
Bürgermeister.
Bürgermeister von
So the
aus
Lord
Milan,
Mayor
aus seinem
of
Land
Milan
das Geld in
uh,
arabische Länder
transferred his money to Arab countries now, and so on.
aus Medien. Ich kann
So
nichts
this,
jetzt anders
this
sagen,
was
ja.
reported in the media, for
Ja,
example.
klar, das Problem besteht, dass
So
wenn
this
sie
problem exists, of course, that they
diese
relocate well, their contacts or their riches and so on.
Methode, die
But
zurzeit auf
still,
dieser Kontrolle
there's a
nicht geachtet wird,
possibility
also so.
that,
Wie gesagt,
for
dafür
example, the
braucht man entschlossen sein,
banking
das
controlling,
zu
for
sehen.
example.
Das ist
So we have to be more consistent about this.
mit dem Thema der Souveränität wird hier
And
manipuliert. Sehr
so
stark.
there's a
Und
lot of
auch in
manipulation as
das
regards sovereignty.
Souveränitätsthema im Westen
And
wird auch oft nicht
also
gut
in the
gebraucht.
West, they use it wrongly, this topic. So what the civic society asks from the West is that they have more determination and strong sanctions, because with our own forces, will the civil society not be able to do that? It's too small, it's too weak. So in the long term, you cannot only build on enthusiasm. So I'm a bit skeptical about this. So I'm quite astonished that for more than 200 days they went in the streets every day. So for me, this is quite heroic, and this also motivates me personally when I see that the people, how they risk their own lives, actually. But from a rational point of view, we need more kind of an equal resistance. So they are corrupt criminals, just like as criminals Putin, for example. So it's this Homo Sovieticus mafia mentality that, and sometimes in the West people did not take that serious, this mentality. But we really have to take it serious, these cases. So when we talk about the values of the European Union, yeah, but it's not just about this. Also, pragmatically, Georgia has to offer something. So, and the government is aware that Georgia is interesting for the European Union, be it for security reasons, trading roads and so on, Black Sea area and so on. So, and they strongly manipulate others with that.
Die gehen bewusst auf die Konfrontationslinie
and
mit dem Westen.
They deliberately like to confront the Western countries with that. And therefore we think that they do not deal with, or they do not pursue their own politics. So, because it's not a pro-Russian government, it's a Russian government, because reasonable people would not shoot themselves in their own knee. But that's actually what they're doing, our government at the moment. And so it's not really rational. And the only explanation is that they're not independent in their politics, but they get instructions from somewhere else. They force them to do what they're doing, actually. And in certain incidents and telephone talks, this also came up. I don't want to speculate here, but for our society,
Ähnlichkeit und gleiche Mentalität und Modus das Regieren mit dem russischen
it's not just similarities that we have with the Russian government, but so it's not just pro-Russian, but it's completely Russian.
Ich würde gerne dazu was erwähnen noch.
May I add something regarding this?
Warum sind sie russisch und was sie russisch?
Why is it Russian, and what they do in a clearly Russian way? So the Russian narratives and the tools that they're using for this. For example, I was asked to produce a little film about propaganda in Georgia for the University of Potsdam. So I intensively dealt with this topic, and it turned out quite clearly that this Russian narrative comes from Russian channels. For example, that this idea of the deep state, the World Party and so on. So So this invisible enemy is that the Georgian government is constantly talking about and which doesn't exist at all. And so this was also done with Trump, for example, also in Hungary. If you watch Hungarian media, so Orban is using the same narrative. So it's always about this deep state. So our prime minister, so the not acknowledged prime minister, does the same thing. So for this reason, we can clearly say it's not just pro-Russian, but they are Russian. They have taken the tools from Russia. And it's really a pity that not so much is reported about this also in Germany and also in Georgia, because there's such a limited number of media that could still report on that. And therefore this propaganda can spread and spread and spread, because they have lots of money available, just as the professor has mentioned. So they have the money, they have the power, they have the media under their control. So the three large TV stations, also the public TV station, 2 private TV stations, online media, Facebook, so it's bots and so on. So I strongly hope that that should this time end, and if everything will be investigated, that people will really see who was behind it. Well, slowly we would come to the end of our session, and I would like to ask the two of you, Professor Vadice, you are a lecturer for many young people, and Tomulo, you're still young, and so you are in contact with young people. So what is your advice to young people? What do you tell your students? Leave as long as it's still possible, or stay and have hope for the country? And Tomulo, what does your community in Berlin say? We stay here or we go back, or what is the mood? So the mood is more hopeful or more panic? Well, I wouldn't call it panic. It's rather being careful. So I can give my example. I came to Germany a couple of years ago to study here. I studied journalism. I worked as a journalist, but actually I wanted to become a teacher in Germany. And so my plan was that I would go back and share my experience from Germany and my know-how from Germany. So I think that's very important, being a teacher. So I saw a lot of commitment in this area, but now I no longer am sure whether I would do that. So for personal reason, but it's also about the security of my family here.
Es ist keine Zeit, wenn ich nicht daran denke.
Well, I think about this the whole time, and I always have exchange about this with my friends and family. But I think it makes sense to stay here. But even if I go to Georgia very quite often, but for practical reasons, I'm in Germany here, and I think many friends in Berlin share my opinion. Well, I cannot speak for everyone. We try to make our contribution from here. And the government abroad, also in Germany, has no supporters. I think so. They lost everywhere. So they lost everywhere in the whole of Europe, with the exception of Baku, for example. So we try to support the country and to pass on the information and to report more. Professor Vadici, what can you hear from the students, and what is your advice for the students? Well, that's very difficult. Many students don't see any perspective. Some of my students are quite committed. They also go down in the street. it's very difficult to share some hope with them. So people who can escape are able to escape, they try to flee abroad. So it's a very difficult situation.
Ist das so?
Ja.
That's the case.
Vielleicht ist ja eben so eine nachdenkliche Stille auch.
So maybe this quietness now, this reflective mood is really suitable for the situation, and it's also suitable to bring this event to an end. But I would like to highlight once again that I would like to cordially thank the two of you, because by what you have been sharing here now, we're all able to understand in a better way that this is also courageous, that you show your faces here, your names here, even more so if you're in the country, that you really show your face here, your name, and be critical about the situation. So thank you very much for your readiness to speak here. And
ja, vielen Dank dafür.
So thank you very much.
Dankeschön für diesen.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much for this evening.